What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh video and another tournament report. There have been a lot of DM era format tournaments recently, and that means a lot of tournament reports. So very exciting to see all these communities grow around these formats. And this tournament was actually the one held in the YGO from Zero Discord server. So if you want to join in on any future tournaments of that nature, then definitely head on over to there. We also hold weekly locals for all these formats. But this was a really fun one. This was in Warrior format, which is a very, very exciting format that we've been exploring. It basically feels like a different version of GOAT, where the metagame is very much not defined. And you can very much see that by the deck type representation wheel over here. There were 31 people who joined the event, and there was a lot of variety in what they brought. So this is February 2005 for the timing of the format. And basically, you have a lot of access to the decks that are available in GOAT, but there are some key differences that keep certain decks out of Top Cut or prevent them from doing as well as they could be doing in GOAT. So let's just go through the different deck types and how they're represented, and then we'll jump into the Top Cut and explain why certain decks were more likely to make it into Top Cut or less likely to make it into Top Cut. So first up, the most represented deck, or tied for the most represented deck here, was Goat Control with 4 players on it. Now, Goat Control is a little bit different in this format because you can't quite do the battle position change rules that you can do in Goat format. Basically, the idea is if a monster's battle position has been changed by an effect earlier in the turn, you can't then manually change the battle position of that monster later in the turn. So this means that if you have a 1000-eyed restrict in attack mode, you summon out Tsukuyomi to flip down that 1000-eyed restrict. It is changed from attack position to defense position by a card effect, and thus you can't then flip summon it in main phase 2 because, you know, you've already changed the battle position, and flip summoning would be a manual change of battle position. So very, very complicated ruling, I know, but that does change how Go Control is played a little bit. I've seen Go Control decks not playing Tsukuyomi at all. Some are still playing it, but you have to sort of change the structure of your combo a bit. So it's very interesting to see how the deck is adapted to that rule change. Next up, we got Chaos Turbo at 4 people playing it. And if you see Chaos Turbo and you're scared and you're like, oh no, it's just turning into GOAT 2, where Chaos Turbo is just dominating all these events. Chaos Turbo actually did not top this event, which is kind of wild to say, especially coming from a GOAT context. But the deck did lose some of the things that make it powerful in GOAT, or may not lose, but it didn't quite gain that so far. Because on the limited list, or on the ban list, that is, Grace of Charity and Liquid Duo are both banned. So that's 2 pieces of the Trinity that really do help out Chaos Turbo a lot. Makes Thunder Dragon and Night Assailant a bit worse. So, you know, Chaos Turbo actually, while many people did play it, or I guess 4 isn't too many, but, you know, it's enough. It's the same amount of players on Go Control. It didn't actually make it to Top Cut, which is kind of wild to see. Also, there were 4 people on Warrior. Now, Warrior is the namesake deck of the format, but as people have been experimenting with it more, people have realized that Warrior definitely isn't like a tier 0 threat or anything. Definitely a tier 1 deck, still very good. But as you'll see from the topping deck list here, it definitely isn't the biggest deck in the room. Moving on to the decks that only 3 people played. Firstly, we had Gearfried. Gearfried could be treated as a sort of variant of Warrior, so you could say that 7 people were actually on Warrior this format. But, you know, I think Gearfried enough its own thing to deserve its own slice on the wheel here. Basically, Gearfried uses Gearfried the Iron Knight to both repel Snap Steal and also pair with Blast with Chain to pop your opponent's stuff. You can also play Smoke Grenade the Thief if you really wanted to. I think Smoke Grenade's kind of cope. But, you know, Gearfried plus the Blast is a pretty good combo, and it can basically pop your opponent's stuff. So, cool to see people playing this. Next up, we've got Chaos Return. 3 people were on Chaos Return. Chaos Return is a really interesting deck list. Basically, you know, you are banishing a bunch of your monsters and then playing Return from the Different Dimension to bring them back. This sort of concept does exist in GOAT and later formats. But in this format, DD Warrior Lady is at 3 copies. So you can sort of take advantage of that and get aggressive banishing your opponent's stuff and then go for a big return, bring back all your Warrior Ladies and anything else that might be there. So very, very cool stuff there. Next up, we've got Chaos Recruiter. Chaos Recruiter is basically Chaos decks that are using things like Shining Angel or Mystic Tomato to get more lights and darks in Grave. And, you know, there's sort of like a nebulous distinction between things like Chaos Recruiter or Chaos Turbo, etc. Because both those decks are trying to get lights and darks in Graves quickly. But Recruiter just goes about it through a different way. So, it's good to sort of take note of that. And then moving on from these decks that multiple people played, we had a bunch of people just on their own thing, just doing singleton decks here. So after Chaos Recruiter, we've got one person on Tomato Control, which maybe you could loop in with Chaos Recruiter, but the Tomato Control deck might be doing other things, like bringing out certain dark monsters that make it more controlling. I haven't seen the list, so I don't quite know. But, Tomato Control is a deck that's seen a lot of play up to this point. So kind of cool to see it here. Next up, we got Resurgence Turbo. I was actually on Resurgence Turbo, and the deck was really good. I'll talk about it a little bit later, even though I didn't top. I think it's a very good deck in this format because you don't have Lightning Vortex or anything like that to remove all the monsters that you bring out. There's also no Mirror Force, so there are less board wipes that can really stop the Resurgence Turbo combos. Next up, we got Mataza Aggro. So decks playing Mataza the Zapper to get in for a ton of damage, maybe boosting it up with equip cards, kind of like Hayabusa OTK in formats previously. Next up, we got Recruiter Control. I guess this is a recruiter-based deck that is not trying to go for the chaos stuff, so maybe playing things like Giant Rat or maybe even Mother Grizzly. So cool to see that there. Next up, we've got Light Burn. So this is very similar to the Fairy Burn list that's been popping up in GOAT format a bit, trying to adapt it to this format here. Next up, we got Science FTK. Now, that is a big sort of caveat for this format for people who are interested in it. Science FTK is around. People can play it. Luckily, though, Science FTK did really badly this tournament. I think that's a sign that Science FTK is not necessarily as scary as people might think it is. It sort of reminds me of Library FTK in GOAT format, where you can play it, and when it does go off, it's very scary and frustrating to play against. But realistically, it's not really going to go off all too often, and so you don't really have to worry about it too much. Next up, we got Earthbeat. So this is very similar to the Earthbeat deck that's going on in GOAT right now and doing relatively well. Unfortunately, didn't top here, but cool to see it represented. One person on Water Control. Water Control has topped a previous tournament, so cool to see it represented here again. The fact that it didn't top here could just be because only one player was on it, or it could mean that the deck maybe isn't as tier 1 as people have expected. Next up, we got Fusion Gate Turbo, which is a very cool deck that I'll talk about later, but very, very cool sort of like Fusion Gate Turbo hybrid with Fusion Gate trying to bring out Dark Paladin. So cool stuff there. And lastly, there's Soul Control, which is playing Soul Exchange, likely with a bunch of Monarchs as well, to try and bring up big guys and either pop your opponent's back row monsters or rip apart their hand if you bring out Thestalos. But that's going to do it for the deck type representation here. As you can see, wide number of decks represented here. And if you move on to the deck category representation, I'm not really the biggest fan of deck category representation. I think it's less of a good metric than like deck type representation, especially because a lot of these decks can sort of get aggressive or control-y depending on what the game state needs. But as you can see here, there's a good mix of aggro and control. There's also some mid-range and a little bit of combo, but it's mainly just a very balanced format between a bunch of different deck types. So there's a very, very cool sort of wheel here. Now that we've covered the different decks that actually made it into the tournament, let's talk about the decks that actually topped. First up, tied for 5th place, is Barcode on Chaos Return. Now, this deck is really, really sick. I've shown off Chaos Return in this format on my channel before, but this is taking a different approach to it. So basically, this deck is trying to get a bunch of its cards banished, either through bringing out Chaos Sork or BLS, or just doing things like crashing Warrior Lady into things to get banishes there, and then going for a big return push to sort of blow out the opponent. And I think this deck is really, really powerful if it can go off. Now, there are some counters to it. Things like Royal Decree can give it a really tough time. But, you mainly have to worry about that in games 2 and 3. Mainly, your opponent's not going to be main decking Decree, from what we've seen in the format so far. Although, given the construction of some other decks in Top Cut here, maybe that is something that will change in the future. But there's a lot going on in this list, just going through the card by card, BLS, Blade Knight, to get even more aggressive there. You got Breaker and Kaiku. So there are a fair amount of aggressive beaters here. You've also got things like Gravekeeper Spy, along with DD Warrior Ladies as well. So, Gravekeeper Spies are good darks, fetching out other darks from the deck. Warrior Ladies, basically, these are good cards that you can set. Because Warrior Lady can also banish an attacking monster into it. Although Warrior Lady, sometimes you do want to go aggressive and just summon this out, crash into something. Also, double Moth here, so there is a large contingent of flip monsters. And also a Shining Angel to bring out Warrior Lady here. Fiber Jar to reshuffle everything back into the deck. Fiber Jar isn't really a light or dark. It's not really going to get banished, but it can reset the game state. And for a deck that wants to deal damage, that can be good. Also, your banish zone is sort of not affected by Fiber Jar. It just shuffles the hand, field, or graveyard. So, you don't have to worry about the sort of banish setup you do getting reset. So that's actually kind of a neat interaction there with Fiber Jar. But Shining Angel here to fetch out Warrior Lady, try Infecting Virus to pop your opponent's stuff, maybe when going for a big push. Now, no Sinister Serpent in this deck list, so, you don't have that recurable pop there, but honestly, sometimes you don't really need it. You just need to clear away your opponent's stuff and then go for a big return push. So I like this here. Also, you can set up for Lights and Darks Engraved for things like Sork or BLS, so I think that makes sense. Also, as a Zaborg here, this can be good to bring out once you brought out like a Spy or something, or once you flip up like Magician of Faith or something like that. Just popping your opponent's stuff, being a 2400 beater, also being light is very good. And lastly is Zembira the Dark here. Now, Zembira and Blade Knight are two warriors, and this deck is playing a Rhoda package. In addition to the Warrior Ladies. So normally you'd be using like reinforcements to get out the Warrior Ladies, but this deck can also go into Blade Knight and Zembira. So that's a cool package to have in this deck. I think it allows the deck to get a bit more aggressive. For the other spells, they're basically standard stuff, Change of Heart, Confiscation, Heavy Storm, MST, Knock. Knock seeing play in the main deck is a trend that I've noticed in the top cut, which is pretty good. It can banish your opponent's stuff like Magician of Faith and just allow you to get even more aggressive, so I think it makes a lot of sense. Painful Choice, Pot of Greed, Premature Burial, the Double Rotas as I mentioned. Smashing Ground, kind of an interesting choice, but this does deal with your opponent's monsters, so that can be very good. Stops things like Warrior Lady, stop things that are annoying to deal with like Shining Angel or Spy. So I think this makes a lot of sense. Snatch Steal and Forceful Sentry for the traps. Call the Haunted. Double Return, not going for 3. Return can brick if you draw too many of it. So I guess that makes sense why you'd go for double of it. But it is, I'm kind of curious whether it was a bit harder to pull off the combo sometimes, just not seeing return. So that's an interesting choice, but I definitely do respect it. Reindestruction there, and double Sakuretsu Armor as well for more removal. Torrential Tribute, and lastly, a single trap Dust Shoot. Dust Shoot is a card that has seen some experimentation in this format. It's unclear the exact numbers that people should play or if it should be played in the main deck, but Barcode played in the main deck and apparently it worked out pretty well for them. Also, double trap Dust Shoot in the side to bring in, so that way if you know you're going first, you can bring in a full copy of 3 Dust Shoots. The side deck also has things like Mobius, Shinzo, for more back row heavy decks, another Kaiku for more chaos focused decks, a Shura Priest here to get over like tokens, if you're up against Goat Control or things like that, Dekoichi here for more flip stuff, Knock for if you're bringing in anti-flip hate, Soul Exchange here to pair with your Monarch package if you do bring that in, Sword of Revealing Light to stall the game a bit, Saku and Widespread Ruin for more battle protection, and a Book of Moon here, just a very versatile card that you can bring in a variety of situations. So, I think this is a very, very good Chaos Return list. I think it's a great place to start if you want to play the deck. So very, very cool to see it top. Next up, also tied for 5th, we've got Almin on Goat Control. Now, Goat Control was a very popular deck in the top cut. Actually, 3 people were on Goat Control out of 4 people who played it. So that shows that this deck is really, really good if you have a skilled pilot behind it. And this deck is definitely very interesting. It's not necessarily the direction that I would go with Goat Control, and it's very different from a lot of the other decks playing Goat Control, but it is pretty good, and it did make the top cut, so good to keep in mind. For the monsters, double Abyss Soldier and a Serpent. This makes a lot of sense because you can do things like, bounce and equip target from your Thousand Eyes, or you can just bounce an opponent's monster to attack in with Thousand Eyes. You can sort of form a pseudo Sook lock that, if your opponent just has 1 monster on the field and you've already sucked up with Thousand Eyes, you can bring out Abyss Soldier, just keep setting them back a monster and keep attacking in with Restrict. So that's, I think, a good inclusion here. Also, you've got Mobius as well to pair with Abyss Soldier and also pop your opponent's spells and traps. You got Serpent and Tribe as well. So a bit of a Walker package in the Goat Control deck, but I think that makes a lot of sense. Also, Tsukiyomi is here. Now, I mentioned that not every Goat Control deck is playing Tsukiyomi. Tsukiyomi can be still very powerful. You just have to sort of, set it up correctly. But even if you're not using it on Restrict, it can stop things like your opponent's breakers or set down some flip monsters that you might have. So I do think Sook is pretty good here. And you notice that Almin is on a fair flip package here. 1 Dekoichi, double Spy, double Merchant, and double Moth. Merchant is a card that hasn't really seen too much experimentation here, but it is a level 1. It can get you a powerful spell from deck, and this deck is not playing many monsters, so that can be pretty good to include here. Morphing Jar as well is in this deck to sort of discard your hand and then draw a new one. So that makes sense. You're trying to get into your combo pieces, which is pretty good. And Morphing Jar can be very powerful if it hits powerful things out of your opponent's hand. For the spell lineup, there's a Book of Moon double creature swap. These are both sort of staples in the goat control sort of deck. You can creature swap to give your opponent a goat token, and you can Book of Moon down the Thousand Eyes. You can Book of Moon down one of your flip monsters. So a lot of versatility to this card here. Also, Heavy Storm here, Confiscation, just powerful cards, MST. Also, Triple Metamorphosis to get rid of your tokens, bring out a Thousand Eyes, get rid of your Serpent, bring out a Thousand Eyes. A lot of different things you can do with the Metamorphosis here. And also, you can even meta a Mobius the Frost Monarch into a Ryu Senshi if you really need to. Also, Mirage here with 1 MST. And I'm not really sure how I feel about this. Playing 1 Mirage, 1 MST is kind of an awkward ratio because you don't really have a way to out the Mirage if you've used up the MST. So I'm not the biggest fan of this combination here, especially because like with goat control, you kind of want to have control over what you have in hand, rather than just, playing a Mirage and just hoping. So I don't know about, just doing the 1 Mirage with 1 MST, or you have to do 1 Mirage, but I don't know about the one way to out it, but it worked out well for Almin, so who am I to say? Also, a knock here for your opponent's stuff. Painful choice to send cards from deck to grave. This card is insane. Pot of Greed, Premature Burial, double Scapegoat, not triple Scapegoat. Kind of interesting, but I guess you've got enough level 1 light, they're just level 1 monsters to pair with your meta to bring in 2,000 Eyes. So I guess you don't need multiple Scapegoat, but Scapegoat seems really good in this format. So I'm not sure why you wouldn't necessarily play more. But again, it worked out for Almin here. So Snatch Steal and a Forceful as well to round out the spells. For the traps, a Dust Tornado to clear away your opponent's back row. This does not clear away your own Mirage. This isn't in here for that. It's just mainly to sort of pave the way for your stuff. So I think that makes some sense. Ring of Destruction here and triple Saku to deal with your opponent's monsters. And lastly, a Torrential Tribute to clear the board. Side deck is pretty interesting here. A Berserk Gorilla and a Kaiku to go more aggressive. A Fiber Jar here to reset the game. Tsukiyomi, another one in the side in case you want more than one of this. Another Book of Moon as well. Change of Heart in the side, not in the main. Kind of interesting, but I guess if you're going second, it's a bit better in that case. Change of seems like super powerful. It seems like basically, if you'd play like Mind Control or Brain Control in a GOAT deck, why not play Change in that slot here? But I guess in the side, it makes some sense. Like if you're going second, it's better, but I don't know. Mystic Walk here for burn strategies, I assume. Another knock, another Dust Tornado, Mind Crush here, maybe for Warriors, maybe for a variety of decks that would potentially, be searching cards or things that you can guess their cards in hand. Double Solemn there, double Dust Shoot in case you're going first, and a Widespread Ruin to round out the traps. Also, no Magical Scientist. I just noticed that there's no Magical Scientist in this deck. That's kind of wild. Magical Science is really good in GOAT control, as you'll see in some of the other topping lists. But, it is a card unique to Warrior format, so maybe Almin wasn't aware of it or wasn't on their radar. Or maybe they just thought it wasn't good enough to include. But I think the Scientist is a must-include in GOAT control in the future. Still a very interesting list, and it does show a variety of the things that you can do with GOAT control in this format, so I do think it's very cool for that. Next up, also tied for 5th, we've got a Ratos on Gearfried here. Now, Gearfried is a bit of a pet deck for a Ratos. They do like that in a variety of formats that we've been playing. And it really worked out for them here. So this is basically Warriors, but you also have this package with the Gearfrieds and the Blast with Chains. So that allows you to get a bit more controlling. But, in addition to the Gearfrieds, of course, there are the standard Warriors that you'd search out, like, Blade Knight, Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke, Don Zaluk, Exiled Force, and Mystic Swordsman level 2. All these cards are still very powerful in this deck, and when you're playing Tur Roa, you can turn it into a toolbox. You've also got double Kaiku here to banish your opponent's stuff, also just be a big beater. A Breaker here to clear away the back row. A BLS here, you've got Lights and Darks to banish off things like Blade Knight, your Kaikus, your Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke's, etc. This deck's actually playing more Lights than Darks, but oftentimes your Warrior Leads will get banished, so it is good to know about there. But we've also got a Tribe Infecting Virus. No Serpent here to pair with that. But, just like with the Chaos Return deck, you don't necessarily need Serpent to pair with this. You can pitch a later Dark. You can just clear the way to get in for more damage. So I do like that choice there. For the spells, Double Rota to search out any warriors you might be looking for, Premature Burial, a Pot of Greed, Forceful Sentry, Confiscation, Snatch Steal, Change of Heart, a Smashing Ground to deal with your opponent's big monsters, Heavy Storm, and MST. So just like cutting down to the bare essentials of spells. But these are all like very, very good spells. So it makes sense to include them here. For the traps, there's a much bigger trap lineup here because this deck is more of a control strategy than your typical warrior deck. So you've got, Dust Tornado, Call the Haunted, triple Solemn Judgment, triple Sakuretsu Armor, double Blast with Chain to pair with your Gear Freeze, but also just to serve as a battle trick, Ring of Destruction, and a Torrential Tribute here. For the side deck, double Dust Shoot to bring in if you know you're going first, double Knock. You can also bring this in if you're going second, but also if you're up against a more flip-focused strategy. Double Spy here in case you need the defensive pressure. Wang Hus to deal with your opponent's goats, along with a Sure Priest to deal with the same thing. Tsukiyomi to flip down your opponent's monsters. Zembire the Dark as another search target off Rhoda if you want to bring this in certain situations. Amazon's Archer for burn decks. This contribute off Jama tokens and things like that. And a Cliff the Trap Remover here to deal with like more stally decks, because this gets under Gravity Bind, gets under level limit, and it can also pop those cards as well. And yeah, that's going to do it for this deck. I think it's like really good. I think it's much better than the previous Gear Freed list that they topped a Warrior tournament with in the past. It just feels like really, really slick, really, really optimized. So very cool stuff. I'm sure there is room for this deck to grow in the future, but this is a great starting point if you want to pick it up for yourself. Next up, we got another warrior-based deck list with Alifu 2. This is just more standard warriors. It's not really Gear Freed, but it still is a very, very good warrior deck. It's playing a lot of the same cards that you saw in the Gear Freed list, like BLS is here, of course. Triple Blade Knight, Breaker, double DD Warrior Lady here instead of triple. Kind of an interesting choice. But I do get it. Like, these cards do get banished, so they don't give you field presence. They are still good to have, but I do get why you just play 2 instead of 3. Don's Luke here to rip cards out of the hand. Exiled Force to pop your opponent's monsters. Double Kaiku to serve as a big beater, also to disincentivize chaos strategies. Mystic Swordsman level 2, and Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke to deal with defense position monsters. Infecting Virus to pop your opponent's stuff, and a Zembire to get over things like Spy, or just annoyingly big monsters. So very, very slick monster lineup here. For the spells, there's a Book of Moon, very versatile card in this format. Confiscation, Heavy Storm, MST. 1 knock as opposed to 2. But, again, this card is very good to play in the main deck. We've seen in a lot of the topping lists in the main. And allows you to get even more aggressive. Pot of Greed here, Premature Burial, also double Rota to search out any of your warriors. Smashing Ground to deal with big monster your opponent might have. Snatch Steal, and Forceful Sentry here. So very standard like spell lineup, just all the really good spells here. For the traps, again, a big trap lineup. Call the Haunted, double Dust Tornado to clear your opponent's spell or traps. Double Jar of Greed as well to draw deeper into your deck. Also bait out spell and trap removal of your opponents. Ring of Destruction here, triple Sakuretsu Armor, triple Judgment, and a Torrential Tribute. For the side deck, a variety of things here. There's double Cypher Soldier for the Warrior Mirror Match. There's also a Chaos Stork here if you want to go a bit more into the Chaos stuff. Double Gravekeeper Spy if you want the more defensive option there. Double Wang Hu to deal with your opponent's goats. Double Mobius to destroy their spells and traps. A Book of Moon here, again, very versatile card. Change of Heart in the side again. The second time we've seen this in the side. Just very powerful card, but in Warriors specifically, I guess this card isn't really necessarily the best thing to main. Another knock here, Smashing Ground, Dust Tornado, and Magic Cylinder. So I think this is a very interesting deck list. Very, very good warrior deck list if you do want to try out warriors. This in the Gear Free deck were actually the only like warrior-based decks to actually make it into Top Cut, which is kind of wild to think about, given that the name of the format is Warrior, and Warrior is still a very strong deck. But unfortunately, this deck just could not compete against the other decks in Top Cut. So very, very cool stuff though. And definitely if you want a more typical warrior deck in this format, this is definitely the one to pick up and try out. Next up, we get to one of the most fascinating decks that topped the tournament, if not the most fascinating deck that topped in the tournament. This is Solon World 69's Fusion Gate Turbo list. Now, basically, this is taking a Reasoning Gate tour. You're playing things like Reasoning, you're playing things like Monster Gate, you're playing a bunch of big beaters and stuff. But it's also combining it with Fusion Gate that fuels your Dimension Fusion. It can also bring out a Dark Paladin here, which is a very powerful fusion monster that can negate your opponent's spells. And you are playing Dark Magician and Buster Blader to go into that. You're also playing things like Skilled Dark Magician and Skilled White Magician, which are just good beaters on their own, but also can bring out your Dark Magician and Buster Blader. And you're also playing things that the typical Reason Gate turbo decks are playing. You're playing things like Chaos Orc and BLS and DMOC and even one Crane. So very, very cool list. Some other spicy cards here. There is a Kaiser Glider. This is a light monster that you can tribute out. And it can bounce an opponent's monster to hand. It can craft the Jinzo and survive. So very, very cool card to see experimented with in this sort of Reason Gate Turbo deck. You got the Jinzo, of course. You've got Scientist here as well. You've got Fiber Jar. I'm not a fan of Fiber Jar in this deck. I think Fiber Jar really conflicts with your Monster Gate and Reasoning stuff. Because if you hit Fiber Jar, like, that just ends your turn, basically, if you don't have another extender, and it's just a really awkward card to hit. I do get why it's here, as it's a very powerful card, and sometimes you just want to shuffle everything back, but, you know, I think in a Reason Gate Turbo deck specifically, this card isn't really good to play. But it clearly didn't hurt Soul too much here. Also, for the spell lineup, there's triple Monster Gate, triple Reasoning to get out your monsters. This deck is very hard to call the level for because there are a lot of good levels of monsters here. You might just go for 8, but there's so many cards that are not 8 here. So, you know, it is just very tough to actually call correctly, and that is a very big strength of this deck. Also, card destruction here to sort of cycle your hand a bit, get monster engraved for your chaos stuff. Pot of Greed, Premature Burial to bring back any powerful monsters in grave. Double Dimension Fusion, this card is really good in this sort of deck at bring back a very powerful board. Painful Choice, Change of Heart, Snatch Steal, Double Metamorphosis. This can pair very well with Scientist. Unfortunately, there aren't really many good 7s, and there's actually no 8s to go into. For the 7s, you can go into Last Warrior, which is something, but also kind of conflicts with your deck a little bit, so a bit awkward there. No 5s being played in this deck, so you can't go into like Balter or anything. You can bring out Scientist and then bring out like a 5 and then meta it away to get out like one of those cards, but it's just kind of rough here. There is triple Scapegoat as well, though, so you can go meta into Scapegoat into a Thousand Eyes and then tribute over that with something like Kaiser Glider or Jinzo, so that can be very good. So that's kind of a neat combo there. Also, Monster Reincarnation. This card's really good in this style of deck. If your opponent does hit your Reasoning correctly, or if you get a Chaos Monster in grave, you can Reincarnation, pitch a card, add back that Chaos Monster, banish, or just get back that monster. So very, very good card in this style of deck. Triple Trunade, this clears the way for your plays and also doesn't destroy your own cards. It can also allow you to loop Premature Burial, which is very nice as well. Double Fusion Gate here to go into Dark Paladin, and a Terraforming to search out that Fusion Gate, and allows for the 2 traps called the Haunted and Ring of Destruction. You don't really need too many traps in this deck, especially since you're playing Scapegoats, which can serve as defensive fodder, as well as Monster Gate fuel, so I do think that this is correct. For the side deck, a lot of interesting stuff here. A Stein in the side deck, if you do want to go into that, into more of a Stein Gate stuff. Although I'm not really sure how good Stein is in Reason Gate Turbo. Definitely something to experiment with in the future, though. A Reaper here as well to get a bit more defensive or just rip cards out of hand. Double Karibo in case you're playing a deck like this that would potentially OTK you. Although Karibo does conflict with your Reason Gate stuff as well, so that is good to know about too. Double Smashing Ground to deal with your opponent's big threats. Double Book of Moon because it's a very versatile card here. Double Knock, this you can bring in when you're going second. You can also bring this in if your opponent's on a flip focus strategy. Tron's Tribute, double Anti-Spell Fragrance for more combo decks that your opponent might play, and also double Royal Decree to shut down their traps. For the Fusion deck is pretty much a standard Fusion toolbox here, although for playing Stein, there's no Master of Oz here. Now, there is an unlimited Fusion deck in this format, so you can sort of just proxy in whatever you might need. But, you know, it's good to have just these cards on hand as reference fuel. Now, whenever you see a deck like this in Top Cut, there's an easy sort of inclination to just dismiss it as being like, oh, it's a fluke that this thing topped. This is like a very sort of like jank and spicy deck. But, you know, it's also somewhat dependent on luck, and maybe like Soul just got lucky and made it into Top Cut that way. I actually think that that is doing a disservice to this deck and a disservice to like what the metagame actually looks like for Warrior format. I think this deck is very good, and I don't think that's necessarily because of the Fusion Gate stuff. For instance, Soul actually said that they never actually managed to bring out Dark Paladin over the course of the tournament. I think that this deck is really good because it's got the bones of a Reason Gate Turbo deck. I think a Reason Gate Turbo is a really good deck in this format. There are only 2 people playing a deck like this, playing the Reason Gate Turbo package here. One was Soul. The other was actually me. I actually played a Reason Gate Turbo list, and I didn't top, but I'm showing my deck list anyways because the reason I didn't top was more a skill issue on my part. I threw one of my games that would have got me into Top Cut, And it's not like a case where like, oh, I threw game 1 and then like, you know, the rest of the match, sort of I won one game and then I lost the last one. No, I threw game 2 after winning game 1. And so it was a very simple mistake I made. I just forgot that Dimension Fusion returned to your opponent's banished monsters as well. And that lost me the game. And so if I had not done that, this deck would have been in Top Cut. And for Reason Gate Turbo, just having 2 players playing a form of it, I do think that that shows that this deck is really good. So I really encourage people to try out this deck. This is my list that I use. I went a different direction from Soul. I was basing this off of a Reason Gate Turbo deck that actually topped a GOAT event. And so basically this is leaning more heavily into the Dimension Fusion and Chaos package. But I'm not really going to go like too deep into this. The deck list is here if you want to, you know, play it for yourself. But I do think that this is another really good way to play Reason Gate Turbo. So I think Reason Gate Turbo is a very strong deck in this format. And, you know, Soul's success here really shows how good it can be. But I also think that, like, it is good to know that if things had changed differently, if I'd been a bit better of a player, then, you know, Reason Gate Turbo could have actually had 100% representation in Top Cut here. But, you know, that's going to do it for covering Reason Gate Turbo. This was a little bit of cope on my part because, you know, I did not make it into Top Cut. So that is good to know about. But I do think that this deck is really, really solid. Next up, also tied for third, we've got Jazz's Goat Control list here. And I generally like this list a little bit better than Almin's list. I mean, this did make third and Almin's made fifth, but I do think that there are some things that this deck is doing differently that I do really approve of. First, let's go through the monster lineup. So there is an Abyss Soldier here paired with, you know, Sinister Serpent and Tri-Infecting Virus, etc. So Abyss Soldier is very good in these styles of decks, although there is only one copy of it here. There's also Air Knight Parshath. Now, you may look at this and like find this really weird because, you know, in GOAT format, GOAT control decks have largely moved away from Parshath. They've found it to be not really worth playing. But in this format, it actually makes a lot of sense because Thousand Eyed Restrict, it's a bit harder to clear it. And so one way to clear it is actually tributing over it. And what's a good tribute monster to bring out? Air Knight Parshath. This is also very good with Metamorphosis to bring out like Dark Balter or something like that. So I do like the inclusion of Air Knight in this deck. I think it's really good. Also, there is an Apprentice Magician here. This can go into a Magician of Faith or a Magical Scientist. Magical Scientist is a really, really good card in this format, especially in this deck because you can meta away a monster you bring out off Scientist and just have a powerful fusion monster there. Assure Priest is here to deal with your opponent's GOAT tokens. I guess Jazz maybe thought that there would be a lot of GOAT mirror matches here, and this card does give you an edge in those. Also, BLS here to banish your opponent's stuff and just be a really good boss monster. Break the Magical Warrior to pop your opponent's spells and traps. A Cyberjar here, very interesting flip monster, but this does clear away your opponent's stuff, also sort of sets up your board for later. So I do like the inclusion of it here. Definitely a card that not many people have been experimenting with, but a card that people should be experimenting with. Also a Demock here. You can tribute this off of, you know, a Thousand Eyed Restrict or any of your other fusion monsters that you bring out off something like Scientist maybe. And this card is very good at getting back spells from grave. Very, very powerful card. Fiber Jar is here as well to reset the game state if things are not going your way. Magical Scientist is here because this card is insane in this deck. If you're playing Triple Metamorphosis, there's no reason not to be playing Magical Scientist. Magical Scientist, just bring down a fusion monster, you met it away, and now you've got a permanent fusion monster on your side of the field. It's also level 1, which pairs with Restrict. So this card is very, very good. Double them off here. You can search these out off of Apprentice Magician, get back powerful spells. So a very, very good card. And also a Morphing Jar here to cycle through your deck a little bit faster. This card is very good, especially if you can sort of use up your entire hand and then set this card. Sinister Serpent here pairs with Tribe, pairs with Jar, pairs with a lot of different things in the deck, pairs with Meta. So very, very good card here. And a Tsukiyomi as well to set down your cards, your opponent's cards. Very, very good card in general. For the spell lineup, there's Change of Heart, of course, Confiscation. Double Creature Swap here to give your opponent tokens or things like that. Heavy Storm, Triple Metamorphosis, Marauder Nightmare with an MST. Now, I complained about this in Almin's list, just having one MST for the Mirage, but this deck also has a Raigeki Break to pop the Mirage as well. So that's just one more level of, you know, being able to clear this card. Generally, when I play Mirage, I generally play more than the one Raigeki Break to pop it, but it worked out well for Jazz here. I definitely think that, you know, you don't necessarily need to go all out on Raigeki breaks, especially because you get to choose when to activate the Mirage. But I do think it's better to have 2 than 1 out to Mirage, at least. Also, double knock here to clear away your opponent's flips. You've got Painful Choice. You've got Pot of Greed. Premature Barrel, triple Scapegoat here. I like triple Scapegoat over 2 Scapegoat because this card is a key piece of your deck. It's also a lot harder for your opponent to deal with. There aren't really many board wipes besides things like Tribe or Torrential Tribute. But either way, I think this is very good. We've also got Snatch Steal here and Forceful Sentry. For the top lineup, there's Call the Haunted, Raigeki Break, Ring of Destruction, and Torrential Tribute there. All of which I think are very good traps to include in this style of deck. For the side deck, there's Double Dust Shoot. Again, if you know you're going first, bring this in, can be good. And I think you'll notice that like in this format, since there are already 2 hand reps, Double Dust Shoot is something that a lot of people have been going for, and I don't hate it. 5 hand reps is maybe a bit too much, but maybe 4 is the ideal number. So good to sort of keep in mind those numbers there. Double Royal Decree as well to shut down your opponent's traps. Mind Crush here to rip cards out of their hand. Sword of Revealing Light to stall a bit. Mystic Walk against burn decks. Book of Moon, just because it's a very versatile card, can shut down your opponent's plays and stuff. Zambara the Dark here to get over certain cards. Suited Soldier, not quite sure why this is here. I guess it is a big beater that your opponent can't Change of Heart or Snatch Steal. But if you want to do damage, it's kind of unfortunate because it only deals 1,000 damage if you attack directly because it deals half damage. But it is very interesting to include here. I'm curious if that actually ever came up in any of the games that Jazz played. Mobius, the Frost Monarch here to pop your opponent's spells and traps. Kaiki the Ghost Destroyer to banish stuff from their grave. And a DD Warrior Lady here to banish their stuff as well. The fusion deck is teched out to pair with Scientist here. But again, you've got an unlimited fusion deck, so it is good to know about these cards, but realistically, the structure of the fusion deck doesn't really matter all too much because you can always just proxy in whatever you might need. But that's going to do it for this GOAT control list. I think it's very, very slick, very, very good. But there also is one more GOAT control list that we have to talk about later. So, I'll give my final thoughts on the deck then. Next up, we've got Kesha on a deck that's labeled Chaos Recruiter because playing the Double Shining Angels here. Over the course of the tournament, this deck was called various things. Occasionally it was called Warriors Answer to Chaos Turbo because you're trying to play things like Decoichis and go through your deck really quickly. But I think Chaos Recruiter probably is the right name for it because you are using the Shining Angels to get Lights Engrave. You could also count Spy as a recruiter, and this deck is playing 3 Spy. Spy is very powerful in this format. But this deck is only playing 1 Chaos Orc, 1 BLS, so not going as all in on Sorks as you might expect a Chaos Turbo list to go in on. But still, this list is very, very slick, very, very good. Let's just go through it real quick. For your Chaos Monsters, you got BLS, you got Chaos Orc, you got Breaker as well to pop your opponent's spells and traps, you've got Triple Warrior Lady to banish their monsters, Double Shining Angel here as well to get into your Warrior Ladies. You've also got triple Decoichi here, which can draw you cards, which can be very good. Triple Gravekeeper Spy to just serve as a wall and also fetch out another Dark from deck. Double Magician of Faith here to get back powerful spells, Sinister Serpent, and a Tribe Infecting Virus. Also, a Mask of Darkness to get back powerful traps, which is a very interesting tech that not many people have been on. So, cool to see Mask doing its thing here. We also got Change of Heart, Confiscation, Heavy Storm, Mirage Nightmare here, MST, and they, again, just the 1 Raigeki Break, 1 MST, I guess it is good enough for people, but I generally like playing a bit more ways to remove Mirage. But, Kesha is also playing Triple Jar of Greed and an Upstart Goblin to draw deeper in the deck, so you're more likely to draw into your outs to Mirage, so I guess it does make sense to do that. You've got a painful choice here as well, Pot of Greed, Snatch Steal, Forceful, and the Upstart, as I mentioned. For the traps, we got the Triple Jar of Greed that I mentioned, the Ring of Destruction to pop your opponent's monsters, Triple Psycho Armor to pop their monsters as well when they're attacking in, Torrential Tribute here to pop the entire field, Double Bottomless Trap Hole here to banish powerful monsters that your opponent might bring out, and lastly, a Raigeki Break here. I kind of like Raigeki Break over the Bottomlesses, but Bottomless can be very good at banishing your opponent's Warrior Ladies, and Warrior Lady is at 3 in this format, so it's good to sort of have the option to do that. Also doesn't cost you a card. For the side deck, a lot of very interesting cards in the side here. You've got Jinzo to shut down your opponent's traps. You've got Double Cypher Soldier for the Warrior matchup, Fiber Jar to reset the game, Scientist in the side to put the main. This card is very, very versatile to bring in. Double Knock here to banish your opponent's flips. Call the Haunted to bring back your monsters. Double Dust Tornado against more back row focused decks. Triple Anti-Spell Fragrance against more combo oriented decks like Reason Gate Turbo. And lastly, Double Curse Seal of the Forbidden Spell to also deal with spells and also banish all those spells from the deck. So that's kind of interesting there as well. But I think this deck is very slick, and it sort of shows a deck type that not many people have been playing or experimenting with, so kind of cool to see. I'm curious to see how this deck will continue to develop further as we continue to explore the format. Lastly, for the winning list of the event, we've got Gberman on GOAT Control. I thought going into this that there was at least one top GOAT Control player not on Sook, but I guess everyone was on Sook, so maybe Suka's the way to go in goat control in the future. Even though it does have a bit of an awkward synergy with Thousand Eyes in this format, it can still be very good at setting your flips back down again. And I think this deck is a very slick deck. Not just for the Suk, but also just for everything else in it. You got the Assura Priest, which, again, just like in Jazz's list, this card is for the mirror match, and it can be very strong there. Assura Priest saw a lot of play in this event, and I think that it's a very, very good card for this format. BLS is also in here, giving your big Chaos Boss monster. You got Breaker's Ball to pop your opponent's back row, triple Warrior Lady to clear up their monsters, Exiled Force to deal with their, sets or things like that. You also are playing Rhoda here, bringing out Warrior Ladies and Exiled, and also this one of Zambira here as well to get over big monsters like Spy and things like that. Double Spy here too to fetch out spies from deck, also to pair with your tribute monsters, Zaborg Thunder Monarch. Lily is in here as well. Lily didn't really see much play in this tournament, but it is very, very good, very aggressive. If you can, get it out and attack him for 3,400, that's very good. Although there isn't really an easy way to search this card. You've got Double Magician of Faith here as well to get back powerful spells and also to go into 1,000 Eyes. As Zaborg, as I mentioned, you've got Sinister Serpent and Tri-Infecting Virus to pair with that. Tsukiyomi to set back down your monsters or set your opponent's monsters. You've also got Zambira here as well. For these spells, a lot of spells here. Change of Heart, Confiscation, Painful Choice, Forceful Sentry, Pot of Greed, Heavy Storm, double creature swap to pair with your goats and things like that. Double meta, only 2 meta is kind of interesting. I kind of like just going 3 meta, 3 goat, because meta is just such a powerful card in this deck. Also, no Scientist in this deck. That's kind of wild to me. Scientist is just such a good card in goat control. That it's kind of wild that 2 of the goat control lists were not playing it in the main. But I do think the Scientist is worth including in the main in the future. But you've got these metas here. You got Book of Moon to set back down your monsters and just be a very versatile spell in general. You got MSC to deal with your opponent's back row. A Knock here as well, deal with their flips. You've got Double Rhoda. Triple Goat. I think Goat is definitely a card that you want to play at 3 in these decks. Snap Steal. And lastly, Ring of Destruction plus triple Royal Decree. Very interesting main deck tech here. I guess they expected there to be a lot of trap decks in the format, but very interesting to main deck the Decree. Clearly worked out for them enough. But just very, very interesting tech there. Now, for the side deck, there's a Cypher Soldier, a Gyakugiri Panda, I guess against Goat Control, because this is another good card to punish Scapegoat activations. You've got Mystic Swordsman level 2, you've got Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke, Zamara of the Dark. If you want to go into a deeper warrior package, these can be good to bring in. You got Magical Scientist in the side here. I feel like you just always bring this in because this card is so good in goat control, but I guess maybe they wanted to experiment with it. Maybe they thought it would only be good going second, but I don't know. Tsukiyomi here as well, just having another one. And also a Knock. Maybe if you bring in the other Suk, you'd bring in the other Knock, or if you know you're going second, you bring in the Knocks as well. Triple Sekirotsu Armor to deal with your opponent's attacking monsters. Triple Dust Shoot here to rip apart their hand if you know you're going first. And lastly, a Torrential Tribute to pop the board. So I think that there are a lot of great sort of Go control lists to pick from. I personally, the one that caters to my taste the most is Jazz's list, because Scientist in the main I think is really important. Triple meta, triple goat is very important as well. But clearly, there are a lot of different ways to build goat control, and clearly goat control is a very, very good deck in this format. So if you've sort of been disappointed with goat control's sort of lack of ability to perform super well in a lot of goat events, then warrior format is maybe the format for you, because Goat Control is definitely the top deck of the format now after this tournament. Although it very well might not be for long. This format is still very much in flux. A lot of changes to the metagame could happen in the future, and I'm sort of excited to see what will happen as we continue to explore this format. But that's going to do it for the video. I hope that you enjoyed it as always. If you enjoy this sort of content, please do leave a like down below and also subscribe to the channel. It really does help a lot, and I really like to reach 1,300 by the end of the month. Or I guess by the end of April, because it already is the end of March. But if we could reach 1,300 by the end of March, that would also be great. But I'm trying to set a more realistic goal of reaching by the end of April. I think it would be great if we could hit that goal. So please help do that if you can. Also, if you want to support me directly, I've got a Patreon. So big shout outs to my patrons, Rinswin, GMYFS, Pork Chop Coon, and Bren Donker. It really means a lot to me that you support me this way. And if you join the Patreon, that you'll be able to be shouted out in these videos just like that. Also, again, if you want to play in this tournament, or I guess not this tournament, but in future tournaments like this, then definitely join the YGO from Zero Discord server. Links in the description down below. And if you want to see the coverage of this event on formatlibrary.com, then I'll link that in the description as well. But that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed as always. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.